The scent of stale coffee and desperation clung to the air in the small, cramped office like a persistent fog. My fingers, stained with ink from 100 late nights, danced across the keyboard, each keystroke a small rebellion against the encroaching silence. Outside, the city thrummed with a life I felt increasingly detached from, a vibrant symphony I could no longer hear. 5 years. 5 years since Liam had been ripped from my world, leaving behind a gaping, echoing chasm that no amount of work, no amount of forced smiles could ever fill. My name is Clara Thorne. I'm a journalist, or I used to be. Now, I'm more of a glorified receptionist for a struggling local newspaper, the kind that prints obituaries and lost cat notices with equal gravitas. My days were a monotonous cycle of fielding calls from irate advertisers, chasing down the occasional runaway poodle story, and meticulously crafting the passive-aggressive yet polite rejection letters for aspiring novelists who mistook our classified section for a literary salon. It was a far cry from the breathless exclusives and hard-hitting investigations I'd once dreamed of, but dreams, like people, could be taken away. Liam. The name itself was a phantom limb, a constant ache in the deepest recesses of my soul. He was everything I wasn't: vibrant, spontaneous, a whirlwind of laughter and impossibly bright eyes. We'd met at a university poetry slam, him reciting verses of raw, untamed emotion. Me, a shy bookworm, utterly captivated. He'd swept me off my feet, painting my monochrome existence with the audacious colors of his passion. We were planning a future, a tapestry woven with shared dreams and whispered promises, when the cruel hand of fate intervened. A climbing accident. That's all they'd told me. A freak occurrence, a misplaced handhold, a sheer, unforgiving drop. The words had landed like stones, shattering the delicate glass of my existence. The funeral had been a blur of black, hushed condolences and the suffocating weight of grief. I'd clung to his mother, Eleanor, a frail woman whose sorrow mirrored my own, and together we'd navigated the desolate landscape of loss. The newspaper, the Clarion, had been Liam's passion. His legacy? He'd been the editor-in-chief, a charismatic leader who inspired loyalty and fueled ambition. After his death, I'd thrown myself into his work, a desperate attempt to keep his memory alive, to feel his presence in the ink and paper. But the passion had slowly leached away, replaced by the grim reality of dwindling subscriptions and mounting debt. The Clarion was dying, just like Liam. Today was particularly bleak. The rain lashed against the grimy window panes, mirroring the storm raging within me. Mr. Henderson, our editor, a man whose primary contributions to the paper seemed to be his ability to nap at his desk and his uncanny knack for losing important documents, had just informed me that we were on the verge of bankruptcy. Another layoff was imminent, and I, with my meager salary and even more meager output, was a prime candidate. Clara dear, Henderson's voice rasped as he shuffled into my tiny office, the scent of mothballs and cheap cigars preceding him. He fumbled with a stack of papers, his spectacles perched precariously on the tip of his nose. Bad news, I'm afraid. Truly dreadful. We're going to have to trim the fat, as they say. He avoided my gaze, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. I steeled myself, my heart sinking. Who, Mr. Henderson? My voice was a brittle whisper. He cleared his throat, a nervous tick. Well, Clara, your output has been a bit light lately, and with the financial situation. He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. You're fired. I nodded, a single jerky movement. There was no point arguing, no point pleading. I'd seen it happen before. The Clarion was a sinking ship, and I was just another rat preparing to jump. I understand. I managed, my voice remarkably steady. a testament to years of practiced composure. Henderson offered a weak, apologetic smile. "I'm truly sorry, Clara. You've been a fixture here." "A loyal employee," he patted my desk, a gesture as awkward and misplaced as a bouquet of wilting daisies. "Keep your chin up. Something else will come along." As if on cue, the bell above the office door chimed, announcing the arrival of a new visitor. I didn't look up. My gaze fixed on the flickering cursor on my screen, a tiny beacon in the encroaching darkness. The sound of footsteps approached, a rhythmic cadence that somehow felt familiar. A deep, resonant voice, a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years, a voice that had haunted my dreams and whispered in the quiet corners of my mind, sliced through the stagnant air. "Excuse me," the voice said, laced with a hint of impatience, a familiar, charming impatience. "Is this the Clarion?" My breath hitched, my fingers froze mid-keystroke, the world tilted on its axis, the stale coffee, the desperation, the impending unemployment, it all faded into a hazy, insignificant background. Slowly, agonizingly, I raised my head. And there he stood. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair a little longer than I remembered, swept back from a forehead that was still impossibly smooth. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, met mine, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, they widened in recognition. A ghost, a hallucination, a cruel trick of my grief-addled mind. But he was real. The way the fluorescent light caught the fine stubble on his jaw, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes, the way his lips curved into a hesitant, disbelieving smile. He was real. Liam, my fiancé. Liam, who had died 5 years ago, stood before me, alive and breathing, in the decaying office of the newspaper he had loved. My knees buckled. The world spun. The last coherent thought that registered before darkness consumed me was a single, impossible word. Liam. The world swam back into focus, a hazy, disorienting swirl of beige walls and the lingering scent of stale coffee. My head throbbed, a dull counterpoint to the frantic hammering in my chest. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust, to make sense of the impossible tableau before me. He was still there. Liam. Standing in the doorway of Mr. Henderson's cluttered office, a ghost made flesh, a cruel trick of the light, a hallucination born of grief and exhaustion. But his eyes, those impossibly blue eyes that had once held the universe for me, were undeniably real. They were fixed on me, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Concern, perhaps? Or was it that familiar, charming impatience, the one that used to make my stomach flip? Clara, are you all right?" His voice. The same deep, resonant timbre that had once filled poetry slams and whispered promises into my ear. It was a sound I hadn't heard in 5 years, a sound that belonged to a past irrevocably buried. Mr. Henderson, bless his oblivious soul, was still fumbling with a stack of papers, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. He cleared his throat, his gaze flitting between Liam and me. "Miss Thorne, I was just explaining—" "It's all right, Mr. Henderson," Liam interrupted, his voice smooth, cutting through the editor's nervous stammer. He moved into the office, his presence suddenly filling the cramped space, dwarfing the stacks of forgotten newspapers and the general air of decay. He was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the rumpled, ink-stained attire I remembered. He looked polished, unscathed, alive. My breath hitched, my mind, a battlefield of disbelief and dawning horror, struggled to reconcile the man standing before me with the memory of a crumpled body, the sterile pronouncements of doctors, the hollow ache of his mother's grief. It was a chasm, a gaping, echoing chasm, and I was teetering on the edge. "Liam," I managed, the name a brittle whisper, a betrayal of the 5 years I'd spent mourning him. It felt foreign on my tongue, a word I'd long since locked away in the darkest corners of my heart. He offered a small, almost rueful smile. "Hello, Clara." "Hello? Hello?" After 5 years of silence, of absence, of a void so profound it had swallowed my very soul, he offered a casual, "Hello?" The audacity of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Mr. Henderson, finally registering the sheer strangeness of the situation, peered over his spectacles. "Do I know you, sir?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Liam's gaze shifted to the editor, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the old Liam, the charismatic force of nature who had breathed life into the Clarion. "Liam Sterling," he said, extending a hand. "I'm a former contributor and a concerned party." Henderson shook his hand, his brow furrowed. Sterling. I don't recall the name." "It's been a while," Liam said smoothly, his eyes back on me. He took a step closer, and I instinctively recoiled, pressing myself against the filing cabinet. The metal was cold against my back, a grounding sensation in the swirling chaos. "Clara, I can explain." Explain? How could he possibly explain this? How could he explain being alive when I had attended his funeral? How could he explain the gaping hole he'd left behind, the life I'd meticulously rebuilt around his absence, only to have it shattered by his sudden, impossible reappearance? "Explain what, Liam?" My voice was shaking, a fragile thing against the roar of my own confusion. "Explain how you're standing here? Explain how you're breathing when I've spent 5 years believing you were dead?" His jaw tightened, a shadow crossing his face. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You died, Liam. You died in a climbing accident. I saw the news. I identified something." The memory was a fresh wound, raw and throbbing. The grief, which I thought had settled into a dull ache, surged back with a vengeance, a tidal wave threatening to drown me. That's not entirely accurate," he said, his gaze dropping to the worn linoleum floor. He looked uncomfortable. And for the first time, a sliver of doubt, a tiny seed of possibility, began to sprout in the desolate landscape of my disbelief. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again, a nervous tick that had become the soundtrack to my current misery. "Miss Thorne, I really must insist. We were discussing your future employment here. As I was saying, with the current financial situation." Liam held up a hand, silencing Henderson with a look that spoke volumes of authority. "Mr. Henderson, perhaps we could discuss Miss Thorne's future employment later. Right now, she seems a bit indisposed." He turned back to me, his expression softening. "Clara, please, let me talk to you. Not here, not now." My mind was a frantic scramble. Every logical fiber screamed that this was a hallucination, a stress-induced breakdown. But the sheer, undeniable presence of him, the weight of his gaze, the familiar scent of his cologne, a faint, lingering trace of sandalwood, and something wild, made it impossible to dismiss. I can't," I stammered, my voice barely audible. The world still felt unsteady, like a boat tossed on a turbulent sea. "Just 5 minutes, he pleaded, his voice dropping to a more intimate register, the one he used when he wanted something, when he was about to charm me into impossible submission. "Please, Clara, for old time's sake?" Old time's sake. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Old times were a vibrant symphony I could no longer hear, a tapestry woven with shared dreams that had been ripped to shreds. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was watching us with an expression of bewildered alarm. His impending layoff announcement, once the most significant event of my day, now felt like a distant echo. My entire reality had tilted on its axis. "I need some air," I managed, pushing myself away from the filing cabinet. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, heading for the door. I needed to escape the suffocating confines of the office, to find a space where I could breathe, where I could begin to process the impossible. Liam didn't hesitate. He followed me out, his presence a warm, solid weight behind me. Mr. Henderson, looking utterly lost, remained behind, a silent witness to the unfolding madness. We walked out into the damp, gray afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the muted city lights. The air was cool and clean, a welcome contrast to the stale atmosphere of the Clarion. I walked quickly, my pace a desperate attempt to outrun the man who was walking beside me, the man who was supposed to be dead. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice tight with a mixture of fear and a desperate, burgeoning curiosity. "Somewhere quiet," he said. He gestured towards a small, nondescript cafe across the street, its windows steamed up from the warmth within. "My car is parked around the corner." I hesitated, my gaze sweeping over his expensive suit, his unlined face, his very much alive form. This wasn't a ghost. This was real. And the implications were staggering. "Liam," I began, my voice trembling. "What is going on?" He stopped, turning to face me fully. The charm was still there, but beneath it, I saw a weariness, a depth of experience that hadn't been there 5 years ago. "Clara," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I know this is a lot, but I'm alive, and I need you to hear me out." He opened the car door for me, a familiar gesture of gallantry. It was a sleek, dark sedan, a far cry from the beat-up hatchback he'd driven when we were students. I slid into the passenger seat, the leather cool beneath my touch. He closed the door, the soft thud echoing the finality of my old life. As he slid into the driver's seat, his blue eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. They held a plea, a confession, and a question. And in that moment, standing on the precipice of an unimaginable truth, I knew I couldn't turn away. The past had just walked back into my present, and my carefully constructed monochrome existence was about to be painted with colors I never thought I'd see again. The symphony I'd thought silenced was about to blast, and I was utterly unprepared for the melody. The car door clicked shut with a soft thud, a sound far too ordinary for the seismic shift that had just occurred in my universe. Liam's car, a vintage rumbling beast of a thing I vaguely remembered him waxing poetic about at university, smelled faintly of old leather and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, like distant spices or a forgotten vacation. It was a scent entirely separate from the stale coffee and printer ink that clung to my skin like a second skin. I stared at him, my gaze darting from his familiar, impossibly alive face to his hands, now gripping the steering wheel with a casual ease that mocked the frantic pounding in my chest. 5 years. 5 years I'd mourned him. 5 years I'd navigated a monochrome existence painted with the audacious colors of his passion. 5 years since the words, "Liam Sterling is gone," had landed like stones, shattering the delicate glass of my existence. And now, here he was, a vibrant, solid reality breathing the same recycled air as me. "Clara," he started, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the car's chassis, a sound I'd replayed 1,000 times in my head, always ending with the finality of silence. I know this is insane." Insane didn't even begin to cover it. My brain felt like a scrambled mess of wires, each thought a frantic, disjointed spark. Liam, alive, here, my fiancé, the man I'd buried. The man who had walked into my dingy office and reduced my carefully constructed world to rubble. A small hysterical laugh threatened to bubble up. but I choked it back, my throat tight and dry. Insane, I echoed, the word a brittle whisper. Liam, you're dead. He met my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of something that looked like pain, quickly masked by that familiar, charming impatience. I know what they told you, Clara, what everyone thinks. But it's not true. I'm here. I'm alive. He paused, his gaze sweeping over my face as if searching for something. And I need to explain. The offer hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken questions and the weight of 5 years of unanswered grief. My mind, still reeling, struggled to process his words. Explain? Explain how a man declared dead, a man whose funeral I'd attended, whose eulogy I'd delivered through a fog of tears, could simply reappear 5 years later in the cramped office of a dying newspaper? The questions swirled, a tempest in my skull, each one more impossible than the last. Explain what? I managed, my voice barely audible. Explain how you're not dead? Explain where you've been? Explain why you let me believe you were gone for half a decade? The last question, raw and accusatory, slipped out before I could stop it. It was the question that had gnawed at me for years, the one I'd tried to bury alongside him, the one that now clawed its way to the surface with a vengeance. Liam's jaw tightened. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked street outside. The city, once a vibrant symphony I could no longer hear, now seemed to mock me with its continued existence, its oblivious thrumming. All of it, Clara. I'll explain all of it. But not here. Not now. He turned back to me, his eyes earnest, a plea in their depths. Will you come with me? Just listen? My instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this impossible apparition, to slam the car door shut and pretend this never happened. But another part of me, the part that had clung to his memory like a drowning woman to driftwood, the part that had never truly healed, was desperate for answers. The gaping, echoing chasm his absence had left in my life felt momentarily filled by his presence, and the thought of letting him disappear again, of returning to the desolate landscape of loss, was unbearable. Where? I asked, my voice steadier this time, though my hands were trembling in my lap. My place, he said, a hint of relief in his tone. It's a little out of town. We'll have privacy and I can show you. Show me? Show me what? The thought was unsettling, but the allure of understanding, of finally piecing together the shattered fragments of my past, was too strong to resist. I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Okay, Liam, I'll come with you. He offered a faint smile, not quite reaching his eyes. As he pulled away from the curb, the tires spraying a fine mist of water, I watched the familiar facade of the Clarion recede. The grimy windows, the faded sign, the very building that had become a monument to my stalled life, all dissolved into the encroaching twilight. I was leaving behind the scent of stale coffee and desperation, the monotonous cycle of fielding calls and filing reports that had defined my existence for 5 years. I was driving into the unknown with the man who had been my past, and now, impossibly, my present. The drive was a strange, suspended state of being. Liam drove with a quiet focus, the silence between us punctuated only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the low hum of the engine. I studied him, trying to reconcile the man beside me with the ghost I'd mourned. His hair was a little shorter, a few more lines etched around his eyes. But the spark, the intensity that had drawn me to him at that poetry slam all those years ago, was still there. He looked weathered, but undeniably real. You look good, Clara, he said, breaking the silence, his voice soft. I managed a weak smile. You're the one who's supposed to be dead, Liam. I think I'm the one who needs the checkup. He chuckled, a genuine sound this time, and I felt a tiny crack in the wall of my disbelief. I'm sorry, he said, his tone serious again. I'm so sorry for all of it. I never wanted you to go through this. Then why, Liam? The question was a plea, a desperate attempt to anchor myself in this surreal reality. Why let me think you were dead? He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to carry the weight of his years away. It's complicated. A lot has happened. Things I can't easily put into words or explain in a 5-minute conversation in a parking lot. He glanced at me, his eyes holding a depth of experience I hadn't seen before. It involves choices, bad ones, some of them, and people who were dangerous. Dangerous. The word sent a shiver down my spine. Liam, the free-spirited artist, the poet, the man who had once painted my monochrome existence with the audacious colors of his passion, involved with dangerous people? It was a narrative I couldn't begin to construct. Dangerous how? I pressed, my journalistic instincts, dulled but not extinguished, kicking in. I'll get to that, he promised. Just trust me, for a little while longer. Let me tell you my story. You were always my best listener. He remembered that. He remembered the late nights, the shared dreams whispered under the stars, the comfortable silences that spoke volumes. The memory was a sharp pang, a reminder of what I had lost, and what, impossibly, might be returning. The landscape outside began to change, the urban sprawl giving way to rolling hills and darkening forests. The rain had lessened to a persistent drizzle, and the sky was a bruised purple. We turned off the main road onto a winding, unpaved track that disappeared into the trees. A sense of isolation settled around us, a complete disconnect from the world I knew. Finally, a small, weathered cabin emerged from the gloom, nestled amongst tall pines. It looked rustic, almost secluded. Liam pulled the car to a stop in front of it. The air here was different, clean and sharp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. This is it, he said, turning off the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the gentle drip of water from the trees. I looked at the cabin, a simple structure that seemed to belong to another time. It was a far cry from the life we had planned, the life of shared apartments and future ambitions. This was unexpected. You live here? I asked, my voice laced with surprise. For a while, he admitted. It's quiet, and it's safe. Safe. The word echoed his earlier mention of danger. My unease grew, a small seed of apprehension taking root in the fertile ground of my disbelief. Liam, what exactly are you going to show me? I asked, my voice tinged with a newfound wariness. He opened his car door, the familiar click sounding again, a punctuation mark in the unfolding mystery. He stepped out, then turned back to me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. The truth, Clara. I'm going to show you the truth. He extended a hand, his fingers stained with something dark. Not ink this time, but something more earthy, like dried soil. Come on. Hesitantly, I reached out and took his hand. His grip was warm and firm, a tangible anchor in the swirling vortex of my confusion. As I stepped out of the car and onto the damp earth, I felt a strange sense of stepping across a threshold, leaving behind the world of 5 years of mourning and entering a reality I couldn't possibly comprehend. The cabin loomed before us, a silent sentinel guarding secrets I was about to uncover. The rain had stopped completely now, and the first stars were beginning to prick through the bruised twilight sky, distant and indifferent witnesses to the impossible reunion unfolding beneath them. The silence in Liam's cabin was so profound, it felt like a physical presence, pressing in on me from all sides. It was a stark contrast to the constant hum of the city, the incessant chatter of the office, even the drumming of rain against the Clarion's grimy windows. Here, the only sounds were the crackling fire in the hearth, its flames casting dancing shadows that writhed like trapped spirits, and the shallow, ragged breaths I took, each one a testament to the impossible reality I was now inhabiting. Liam sat across from me, his eyes, the same startling blue I remembered, now etched with a weariness that hadn't existed 5 years ago. He'd shed the coat he wore when he'd materialized in my office, revealing a simple dark sweater that did little to hide the lean strength of his frame. He looked real. Too real. The phantom limb of his absence had ached for so long, a constant dull throb beneath the surface of my carefully constructed normalcy, that seeing him breathing, solid, in front of me, felt like a cruel hallucination. "You're quiet," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the stillness. It was the same voice, the one that had coaxed poetry out of me at that raucous university slam, the one that had whispered promises of forever. But now, it was layered with something I couldn't quite decipher. Caution? Regret? I managed a shaky laugh, the sound brittle and foreign. Quiet? Liam, you walked into my office 5 years after your funeral. I think quiet is the least of my reactions. My hands, still faintly stained with the Clarion's ink, twisted in my lap. My sensible, professional attire felt absurdly out of place in this rustic sanctuary. I should have worn something else, something that didn't scream woman who thought her life was over. He leaned forward, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. I know, and I'm sorry, Clara. More sorry than you can possibly imagine. I didn't have a choice, not then. A choice? The word was a raw, torn sound. You had a choice to leave me to grieve, to let me believe you were dead, to let Eleanor grieve. What kind of choice was that, Liam? The abyss that had opened up 5 years ago, the gaping, echoing chasm where my future used to be, felt like it was widening again, threatening to swallow me whole. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar, it made my chest clench. It's complicated, dangerous. I had to disappear. For my own safety, and for yours. For mine. My voice rose, the carefully constructed composure cracking. You think this was for my safety? Living a monochrome existence, haunted by your ghost? Working at a dying newspaper because I couldn't face anything else? My life has been a wasteland, Liam, and you're telling me you saved me? The words landed like stones, shattering the delicate glass of my existence all over again. He flinched, and a flicker of something, pain, crossed his face. I understand why you're angry. You have every right to be. But please, Clara, just let me explain. Everything. From the beginning. He gestured to the worn armchair opposite him. There are things I've kept hidden, things that would have put you in danger if you'd known. People who wanted me gone. Permanently. People? I echoed, my mind racing. The news of his death had been so stark, so simple. A climbing accident, a tragic loss. There had been no mention of foul play, no suspicious circumstances. Just gone. Yes, people, he confirmed, his gaze hardening. And they're still out there. That's why I had to leave, why I had to sever all ties. I couldn't risk them finding you, finding us. He paused, his eyes searching mine, earnest and pleading. I faked my death, Clara. It was the only way to protect myself, and by extension, you. The confession hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. Faked his death. The words were nonsensical, a cruel joke. But the man sitting before me, the man I had loved with every fiber of my being, was not a ghost. He was flesh and blood, breathing and speaking. The funeral, the grief, the 5 years of desolate landscape of loss, all of it felt like a meticulously crafted lie. Why now? The question was a whisper, laced with a desperation I couldn't suppress. Why reveal yourself now? Because it's no longer safe for me to stay hidden, he said, his voice low and serious. The threat has resurfaced, and I couldn't bear to stay away any longer. Seeing you, seeing what you've been through, it's been tearing me apart. He looked away, towards the flickering flames, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the vulnerable man I'd fallen in love with, stripped of the secrets and the danger. So you just show up at my office? I couldn't help the sarcasm that laced my tone. After 5 years of silence, you decide to grace me with your presence in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, right when my boss is about to fire me? The irony was almost too much to bear. A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. The timing wasn't ideal, I'll admit. But I was running out of options. I needed to get you out of there, somewhere safe, somewhere I could talk to you without being overheard. He gestured around the cabin. This place is remote, isolated. Nobody knows I'm here, and nobody knows you're here with me. My gaze swept over the room. It was functional, rustic. A sturdy wooden table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, a small kitchenette. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, a clean, crisp scent that was a balm to my frayed nerves. It was a world away from the stale air of the Clarion office, a world away from the suffocating weight of my grief. Who are these people, Liam? I finally asked, my voice steadier now, the initial shock beginning to recede, replaced by a gnawing curiosity and a flicker of the old investigative fire. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. It's a long story, one that involves a lot of money, a lot of betrayal, and a very powerful organization that operates in the shadows. He met my eyes again, his gaze intense. They thought they'd dealt with me, permanently eliminated the problem. But I was smarter, and I had help. Help? People who believed in what I was doing. People who were also being exploited by them. We managed to disappear, to go underground. I've been living off the grid, changing my identity, always looking over my shoulder. He leaned back, the firelight illuminating the lines of strain around his eyes. But they're persistent. And lately, they've been making noise, indications that they're looking for me again. And if they find me, Clara, they'll find you too, because you're the last loose end. The word sent a shiver down my spine. Loose end. I, who had felt so utterly insignificant, so disposable, was apparently a vital piece in Liam's dangerous game. It was a terrifying thought, yet it was also, in a twisted way, exhilarating. After 5 years of feeling like a forgotten footnote, the idea that I mattered, that my life had a purpose beyond reporting on local bake sales and council meetings, was a potent antidote to the despair that had been my constant companion. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The question wasn't just about our immediate future, but about the entire foundation of my reality. Liam Sterling, the man I'd loved and mourned, was alive, and he was dangerous. He stood up, crossing the small room to a window that looked out into the inky blackness of the forest. He paused, his back to me, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. Now, he said, his voice resonating with a new kind of certainty. Now we figure out how to make sure they never find us again. And you, Clara, get to decide if you want to be a part of that, if you want to reclaim the life they tried to steal from both of us. He turned back, his eyes holding a mixture of hope and apprehension. I can't force you to trust me. I don't expect you to. Not after everything. But I'm here. And I'm telling you the truth. The whole messy, dangerous truth. I'm not dead, Clara. I'm here. And I want to be with you. If you'll let me. The fire crackled, the shadows danced, and the silence of the cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my answer. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet. My past had just walked back into my life, not as a ghost, but as a living, breathing man with secrets and dangers I couldn't yet comprehend. The tapestry woven with shared dreams had been torn apart, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to weave a new one. The choice was mine. And for the first time in 5 years, that felt like a terrifying, exhilarating freedom. The scent of pine and damp earth clung to Liam, a stark contrast to the stale coffee and desperation that usually permeated my office. He stood there, a ghost made flesh, his familiar, charming impatience etched into the lines around his eyes, lines I hadn't seen deepen over the past 5 years. He hadn't aged, not really. Or perhaps I had aged enough for both of us. "Clara," he'd said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through me, a sound I'd replayed in my mind 1,000 times, always ending with the chilling silence of his absence. Now it was real. Too real. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Mr. Henderson, my soon-to-be former editor, blinked between us, a bewildered owl caught in headlights. Liam? The name was a brittle whisper, a sound I hadn't dared to utter aloud for so long. It felt like a blasphemy, a betrayal of the grief that had become my constant companion. Liam Sterling, the vibrant symphony I could no longer hear, the audacious colors that had painted my monochrome existence, was standing before me, solid and breathing. He offered a wry smile, the one that always made my stomach flip. "Surprise?" Henderson cleared his throat, a pathetic attempt to reassert control in a situation that had clearly spiraled beyond his comprehension. "Liam, is that really you? We thought..." His voice trailed off, a testament to the sheer impossibility of the moment. Liam's gaze, sharp and assessing, flickered to Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, always a pleasure." The politeness was razor-thin, barely masking a deeper current. He turned back to me, his expression softening, the charming impatience replaced by an earnestness that made my knees weak. "Clara, I know this is a lot, but we need to go. Now." My mind, a tangled mess of disbelief and a nascent, terrifying hope, struggled to catch up. "Go where? Liam, what is happening? You're dead." The words tumbled out, ragged and raw. "I'm not," he said, his voice firm, cutting through the fog of my confusion. "But I can't explain it all here, not yet, not safely." He held out a hand, his fingers outstretched, a silent invitation. My hand trembled as I looked at it. It was the same hand that had once traced the lines of my face, the same hand that had held mine as we walked down the aisle in my dreams. Henderson sputtered, "Liam, you can't just walk in here after 5 years and expect, and Clara can't just leave. She was about to be fired." He gestured vaguely at my desk, a pathetic symbol of my current standing. Liam's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing. "Clara is not being fired. Clara is coming with me." His tone brooked no argument, not even from Henderson. The editor shrunk back, a small, defeated man. "But who are you?" Henderson stammered. "Someone who used to run this paper," Liam said, his voice colder now. "Someone who knows about the people who are making this place, and a lot of other places, bleed dry, and someone who knows that Clara is in danger." He looked back at me, his gaze intense. "The people I was involved with, they don't take kindly to loose ends. And you, Clara, are the biggest loose end I've ever had." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that had fallen. Loose ends. Danger. Liam. Alive. It was too much. The delicate glass of my existence, already cracked and fragile, felt as though it was about to shatter into a million pieces. "What people, Liam?" I finally managed, my voice barely audible. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "The people who are systematically dismantling everything good. The ones who operate in the shadows, pulling the strings. I stumbled onto something big, Clara. Something that could bring them down. And they thought I was dead. That kept you safe. For a while." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But they're getting closer. I had to disappear. For your safety, and mine." The words landed like stones. My safety. My whole life had been a muted ache of grief for him, a constant mourning for the future we'd planned. And now he was telling me that very grief, that very emptiness, had been a shield that was now crumbling. "You faked your death?" Henderson whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Liam ignored him. "I had to. There was no other way. They would have gotten to you. But now the threat is resurfacing. They're looking for me. And if they find me, they'll find you." He reached out again, and this time my hand met his, my fingers closing around his. His skin was warm, undeniably real. A jolt of electricity, or perhaps just sheer shock, coursed through me. "We need to leave this place," he insisted. "There's a cabin, a place I've been staying. It's secluded, safe for now. I can explain everything there. The whole truth." I looked around the office, my office, or what was left of it. The peeling paint, the overflowing ashtrays, the flickering cursor on my screen, a tiny beacon in the encroaching darkness. It was a monument to my stagnation, a symbol of the life I'd been clinging to in the wake of his absence. And now, Liam was offering me a way out, a dangerous, terrifying way out. My mind flashed back to our university days, to the poetry slam where he'd first caught my eye, his words a vibrant explosion against the hushed reverence of the crowd. He'd been a force of nature, and I, a quiet observer, had been swept away. He had painted my world with audacious colors, and his absence had drained it to a stark, unforgiving monochrome. "A cabin?" I echoed, my voice still distant, as if coming from someone else. "Yes, it's a new beginning, Clara, or a second chance." He squeezed my hand. "But you have to trust me, and you have to be ready. It's not going to be easy. The people I'm talking about, they're powerful, and they don't forgive easily." Henderson, emboldened by the sudden focus on Clara, blustered, "Clara, whatever this is, you can't just... your job." Liam finally turned his full attention to Henderson, his eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Henderson, you are a fool. This paper is dying because men like you are too weak to fight for it, too afraid to see the rot infecting it. You're more concerned with your own skin than the truth. Clara deserves better. She deserves... everything." He gave Henderson a look that promised retribution if he interfered further. Then, he pulled me gently but firmly toward the door. My feet moved as if guided by an unseen force. I didn't look back at Henderson, didn't acknowledge the absurdity of leaving my desk, my meager belongings, my entire life as I knew it, in the hands of a man who had just been about to fire me. All I could focus on was Liam's hand in mine, the warmth of his skin, the impossible reality of his presence. The rain lashed against the grimy window panes of the Clarion's offices, a persistent drumming that had always felt like the mournful soundtrack to my days. Now, it seemed to be ushering us out, washing away the stale air of my former life. As we stepped out into the damp, gray afternoon, the city thrummed with a life I felt increasingly detached from, a vibrant symphony I could no longer hear. But with Liam beside me, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of my disbelief, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. And a chilling, potent fear. We walked quickly, Liam's stride long and purposeful, mine faltering to keep pace. He led me away from the familiar streets, toward a nondescript sedan parked a few blocks away. It wasn't the sleek, sporty car he used to drive, but something more utilitarian, more invisible. "This is my ride," he said, opening the passenger door for me. I slid into the worn leather seat, the faint scent of pine and something metallic, like old tools clinging to the interior. It was a far cry from the plush luxury of his old convertible, but right now, it felt like a sanctuary. He got in, the engine turning over with a low growl. "Where are we going?" I asked again, my voice still shaky. "North," he replied, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "A few hours. We'll be off the grid. No prying eyes? No listening ears?" He met my gaze, his expression serious. "Clara, I need you to understand. What I'm about to tell you. It's going to sound like something out of a bad thriller, but it's the truth. And the people involved? They're not amateurs. They're dangerous." My mind reeled. Liam, the reckless romantic, the editor who championed underdog stories and fought against the big corporations, involved with dangerous people? It was a narrative I couldn't reconcile with the man I knew. Yet he was here. Alive. And he was telling me I was in danger. You said you had to disappear for my safety?" I ventured, the question heavy with years of unspoken pain. He nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes. When I started digging into the finances of Global Solutions Corporation, I found something they didn't want anyone to find. They're not just a conglomerate, Clara. They're a front for something far more sinister. And they're willing to do anything to protect their secrets. I was getting too close, and they were closing in. I had to make them think I was gone. Permanently." He glanced at me, a flicker of regret in his eyes. "I know how I left you. It was unforgivable, but I saw no other way. If they'd gotten me, and you were still around, they would have used you to get to me. Or worse." The weight of his words pressed down on me, suffocating. So the grief, the endless night staring at the ceiling, the phantom ache where his hand used to be, had all been a necessary sacrifice? It was a bitter pill to swallow. "But why now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why reveal yourself now?" "Because they're still out there," he said, his voice low and urgent. "And they're making moves. Bigger moves. The threat isn't gone, Clara. It's escalated. And I can't fight it alone anymore. I need you. Need me." The word hung in the air between us, charged with a forgotten intimacy. Need was a word I hadn't heard from him in years, not since before everything. "What do you expect me to do, Liam?" I asked, the frustration and confusion finally bubbling to the surface. "You've been dead for 5 years. I've mourned you. I've moved on, as much as anyone can." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Moving on had been a slow, agonizing crawl through a desolate landscape of loss. He pulled the car over to the side of the road,